What's Hebrews 11, verse 6? Anybody quote that? Without faith, it is impossible to please God. He that cometh to God must believe that. See that phrase, believe that? That's referring to that first aspect where you intellectually, I agree with that. And so there are a lot of people that have asked, do you believe in God? Yes, I believe that. Is that all there is? That's certainly not all there is. The last part of it, if you look at the second page, we're just going to mention it and then go back and develop the thought. The second aspect of saving faith is usually called trust. There's a difference between intellectually agreeing with someone and trusting them. We mentioned last week the example. There's a guy that says he can go across a trapeze wire with a bicycle and put somebody in a basket. He may be able to put a 200-pound dummy in the basket and take it all across the Niagara Falls and back, do that 4 or 5 times. If you ask somebody, anybody believe I could put a human being in there? The hands will go up. I'm looking for a volunteer. How many would step up? I wouldn't. Even though you think you can do it, what's the difference? See, that's where the trust comes in. That's the difference between intellectually, I can see that, and actually putting your life on the line. When do you know that you really know something spiritually? When have you got it? When does it come down to the second part? How does God then help you take it from the mind into the life, into the heart? What's that? When you act upon it, when you use it, like anything else. You know, for those people who've learned how to swim. Anybody here have a good experience about learning how to swim? I mean, you can watch a video all day long. You can see the best instructors in America about how to swim, the strokes and all that, until you get in the water, guess what? I mean, it may look simple, but if you can't swim, is it easy? Well, first of all, there's this fear. And so when do you know how to swim? You can understand how it works when you get in the water and actually do it. So faith involves the trust when you do things. In the book of Luke, chapter 24, we mentioned so often those 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. They were leaving town. Why were they leaving town? Well, they saw Jesus resurrected. They thought it was over. Their hopes and dreams were gone. What did Jesus do? Luke 24, he asked him questions first in verse 25. O foolish ones and slow of heart to believe in all that, there you go, the prophet has spoken, ought not the Christ to have suffered these things and enter into his glory? And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded them in all the scripture the things concerning himself. Then they drew near to the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone farther. But they constrained him, saying, Abide with us, for it's toward evening, the day is far spent, and he went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. Verse 32, an important verse. And they said to one another, Did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us on the road and while he opened the scriptures? What was going on there? Did not our heart burn within us while he walked on the road and opened the scriptures to us? What's that? Well, their faith had failed them because they had the wrong understanding of things. Well, you don't really have the wrong. They had a misunderstanding. They saw Jesus. They had hoped that he would be the one who would redeem Israel. That was their hope, the wrong hope. When they saw him crucified, what happened to the hopes and dreams and ambitions? It's crushed. They're leaving town. But when Jesus goes back and explains what the real purpose of the Messiah was, why did the Messiah come first and foremost? To take care of the sins of the people, and that would require suffering and a death. Now it made sense. The event had already happened. They had the wrong understanding of it, or the misunderstanding. Now that they understood it, how could they act? Like someone, talking about trials. No one likes going through the trials. No one likes going through the storms of life. But after you've gone through it on the other side and learned some things, then things change. Now you know. Anybody here know what it's like to survive cancer? Several of you do. How'd you learn that? I mean, before you had it, you thought this is going to be tough. But after you go on to the other side, is your faith strong enough to handle it? Yes. What did you learn? So I'm saying there's a difference between intellectually acknowledging something and being able to actually live the faith. If you look at the bottom of the page, the first page, there's some verses there that talk about the first acknowledgement of faith. Hebrews 11:6 we've mentioned. John 8:24, you know what it says? Unless you believe that I'm he, you'll die in your sins. So when you see believe that, that's usually referring to some knowledge that you agree with. In John chapter 14, verse 10 through 11, you can look at that on your own time, but it talks about believing that I came from the Father. But there are other passages that talk about believing in. What's the difference between those verses in John 3:16? What's John 3:16 say? For God so loved the world that whoever believeth in him. See, it's a different wording. Believes in him should not perish. Well, what does that mean? There's a difference between believing something to be true and believing. That's talking about the trusting aspect. So can you, the type of belief that's mentioned there that will bring salvation is a trusting faith that obeys. If there's no obedience, is it faith? So people carry Bibles in the church building this last Sunday, this next Sunday. If they're not obeying the word, are they really faithful? No, they're not. So when is it a true faith? When it trusts and obeys. Well, what will cause you want to do that to begin with? So we learn things. We looked at the book of Luke chapter 1. If you remember, what was the purpose for Luke recording the Gospel of Luke? Anybody remember verse 4? That you might have a certainty of these things. What do you mean by that? Some of you look at Christianity, you just have to trust it. It's a leap of faith. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. See, that's wrong. Christianity is a logical religion based on fact and based on reason. You can use your brain and common sense. And we looked at 1 John, the first letter, the first 4 verses. What did the Apostle John say about the disciples and their relationship to Jesus? We saw him, we touched him, we heard him. Why are those things mentioned there in the text? Their life is evidence of what? It's true. It's true. We mentioned there are people that were historians outside of the Bible. Here's a question. Did a man by the name of Jesus walk the streets of Palestine in the first century and perform miracles? Yes. The Bible tells us so, but are there any other secular historians recording the same thing? Yes. Is he a historical figure? Yes, he is. So I'm just saying what Christianity invites you to do is look at the evidence. And then when you read things and study things, what does God allow to come into your life to prove those things are true? What happens? What's that? No, what happened? The knowledge is there, but how do you gain it? How is this tested then in your life to be shown to be true? How did Jesus conclude the Sermon on the Mount? He uses a parable. We know the parable? The foolish man built his... What's that parable about? There's a wise man and the foolish man. That's a parable. Who's the wise man? The man that built his life on the rock. What was the rock? The teachings of Jesus. The foolish man built his house on the sand. When the storms came, what happened to the man who built on the rock? His life made. And what happened to the man who built his life on the sand? What does that mean? What's implied with that parable? That someday in some lives storms might enter in? No. Guess what? It don't matter who you are, how much money you have, the family you're part of, how smart you are. In every single life, stuff happens that you don't want. So a lot of times when you talk about people that have problems with God, and some of the people who are atheists, some of the reasons why, like Darwin, You know, he was started out somewhat religious, but when his girl died, children died, I mean, that sent him off into a tangent. Some of the people, like, who's the guy who owned CNN? Ted Turner. He grew up in Chattanooga. He went to church all the time. He thought about being a preacher. When his brother died and everything's happened, he turned against God. Why? Bad things happen. People died. There can't be a righteous God, a good God. You know, Friday, we're going to, I passed out something to read. Here's a discussion we're going to have Friday morning among the students of School and Evangelism class. Why would a good and loving God create a place called hell? Does that make sense? Is that a good discussion to have? Why would he do that? That's a tough question. Here's a righteous God. I mean, and did he know that most people would end up in hell? Did he not know? I mean, what did Jesus say in Matthew 7, at least of accountable people? Matthew 7, 13 and 14. There's a narrow gate and there's the broad way. What about those who enter in? And few there will be that enter in. So from Jesus' assessment, what's going to happen to most people? If that was true, why would God create all those people to begin with? I'm just saying there are things that will test your faith. As we mentioned on Sunday morning, there are things of a moral nature that make sense. There are moral laws. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie or commit adultery. There are things that we like, and whether you're an atheist or not, I mean, there are rules of getting along with other people that you want to follow. Thou shalt not steal. Are you glad that's there? I mean, would it take a law to keep you from stealing? No, you know that's just not what you do. Don't take something that doesn't belong to you. I mean, that's easy to figure out. But there are laws, there are commands that God gives that are tests of faith that may not seem to have any kind of moral connection at all. Why would God do that? Give me an example of a test of faith that God requires of people, that people look at and say, I don't get it. I don't see it. Anything, Old Testament or New, anything that God's ever required an individual or the church, the people on the old law, a test of faith that on its surface just seems, what was he thinking about that day? It's just on a whim. What's that? Abraham. What did God tell him to do with his son that he waited all those years for? Go kill him. I mean, I thought that was bad to kill somebody, but he said go kill him. Why would he do that? Well, that's a pretty extreme example. Why did God do that? I'm just saying, what would be some others? How could God test congregations of his people today? What are one of the major tests of congregations? The churches in the land and other places went through a long test about 3 years ago. Anybody know what it was? Starts with the letter C. COVID. How was that a test? How was that a test? I mean, God allowed this virus to be able to flourish, and churches had to deal with, how are we going to deal with this? You think there was any friction that churches tried to settle out? What we should do, what we shouldn't do? Yes. And there are a lot of churches, I mean, it affected us. I mean, some of the meetings we had, it's kind of tough, was it not? There's friction. What about church problems? Would that be a test for people? Can you name me a congregation that's never had any problems? I don't know any of them. I mean, I grew up at Carnes. I love the church at Carnes. And I came back to town in 1999. As much as I love the elders at Carnes and have known, pretty much kept up with them down through the years, a couple of years after I got here, that church was consumed by conflict among the elders. All the elders resigned. It got to that point. They had to resign the eldership and go about 6 months and then put people back in. You think that held the congregation back? Yes. Why would God allow that? Is that a test of faith? Sure it is. I'm just saying there are things that happen that you have to be able to use the scriptures and principle. We went through a tough time there in 2012. Anybody remember Steve Riley? I mean, Steve Riley came in. He was someone who was trained in conflict management to try to guide us in some certain things and things that we could do and things. Well, you guys are not following Matthew 18. I mean, the life is about it can be an individual. It can be a family. It can be a congregation. It can be a nation. A lot of churches lost membership, especially the small ones, over COVID. What do you think that happened? What contributed to a lot of congregations to lose about a third of their members related to COVID? Well, it was God's threshing floor, that's for sure. But what? How did that happen? What did people get into after a while that made it easier for them to not come back? What's that? Turn on the TV and watch at home. They'll never have to go. That's pretty good. And people, guess what? Some people did. Well, they stayed home or gave it up. Why is the church necessary? Why would God, in His wisdom, design the church? Why is it necessary? And we saw the effect of that because what's the church? Look at Hebrews 10, verse 24. What's one great benefit of the church? The verse that says, not forsaking the assembly of themselves together, that's verse 25. Look at verse 24 and tell me a benefit of worship. What should happen when the church gathers together? Let's consider how to stir up or provoke one another unto love and good works. See, that's what should happen. You know, we had a back to school bash, this last Saturday. I mean, we didn't invite anybody else, but it was good for those who came. Why'd that happen? Well, last year we did that instead of Vacation Bible School. This year we did both. Was that good? I think people benefited of that. But how'd that happen? Well, I give Luke and Christine a lot of credit on helping to organize that, because without organization you have problems. And sometimes there are things that happen that just kind of get your head wondering. A couple of years ago, I came in one Wednesday night. There's water all over the floor down there. Larry, what was that about? A drain plugged up. What happened? It overflowed. What happened to the walls in there? It had to be replaced. The insurance guy comes in, looks at it. Anybody know what he did? Gave us $24,000 to fix it. It didn't take $24,000 to fix it. That money has been used to fix some other things, though. I mean, there are things like that happen. I mean, there are things that happen in life, and as Christians, what are we doing? We're supposed to apply the principles, and when we do what's right, and the tests come all the time. I've known people that were faithful there every time the doors are open. Then the guy gets a promotion in a job, and he likes it. He's making a lot more money than he's ever made. He buys a motorboat with it. He got to start skiing. And the dedication that he once had, suddenly it's not there anymore. He starts missing. And within a couple of years, he's only there on Sunday morning. What happened there? What happened? What was his problem? Give me a verse that will combat that. Man's life does not consist of the riches. I mean, do you own the riches or do they own you? Is materialism a threat in the church? I'm saying there are all kinds of things that affect us. If you look at 1 Peter chapter 1, here's a summation of what we're trying to do, the reason why we're studying the life of Christ. We read in verse 3 about those precious promises that come, and the nature of them. It's an inheritance that's incorruptible, undefiled, does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you. We're kept by God's power through faith for salvation ready to be revealed. That's at the end time. In this salvation that we'll have one day in fullness, when on the other side of the chilly river of death, in this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you've been grieved by what? Various trials. What do the trials do? For the next verse. Sum it up for me. Read the next verse. What do the trials do? For those people, what do they make out at Alcoa? What's the big plant out there? Aluminum. Where does that come from? Or if you're at a steel mill up in Pennsylvania years ago, had the big steel mills. What do they put in those big pots? Iron ore and so forth. What do? Man, they heat that up. And what happens? They keep the good stuff and drain off the bad, and now you've got steel. And so, can heat purify things? Can the heat of life purify things? What does it do? It can either be a stumbling block or a stepping stone. Which one's it going to be? It either can make you bitter or better. Which one's it going to be? What's that? See, it depends on you. See, that's where the scriptures come in, and when those trials do come, what must you do to come up with a proper conclusion? God's willing to do all kinds of things. He has this unbelievable power. We read that. He is to do above, beyond that we ask or think, or the power of the word. The power is available there, but what does it take to be plugged into the power? He's going to do his part when you do your part. And he gives us an example. Like, for example, in the book of Numbers, 13 and 14, as the children of Israel finally got to the edge of the promised land, they sent the spies in. One spy represented each tribe. The land flows with milk and honey, but what? There are giants in the land. Should that have been a problem? If they'd been paying attention, what would they have said? Well, 10 men saw the size of the giants, and 2 men saw the size of their God. Who won? God was so upset because their faith failed them. What did he do? How much fighting experience did the people have? Not long after they got on the other side, and there's a chapter in Exodus where they run up against the Amalekites. Anybody remember that story? What was the object lesson from that plan? The Amalekites, they were sorry people, and you're going to have to deal with it for a long time. And so they got a little bit of battle experience. What was that object lesson about? Anybody remember the main points of the lesson? When Moses held his hands up, Israel prevailed. When he dropped them, they started losing. He got tired. What was the solution? One guy holds one arm up, he sits down on a rock, and what did they learn? Well, why did God do that? They still had to go fight, but what was the lesson there? What's that? I will give you the victory when what? And there's a lesson there for us. What's the lesson for us when it comes to leaders? Hold up their hands, support them. And so there are several lessons to be learned. So all those lessons are there. Those object lessons are there. The Bible is full of object lessons. The one mentioned earlier about Abraham. How long did God wait for? There's a lesson right there. How long did God wait for Isaac to show up? He gave the promise. 9 months later, Isaac showed up, right? No. How long did he wait? About 25 years. But along the way, they got tired and said, we need to help God out. What was the solution? Well, Ishmael and Hagar, and what happened? We're still paying a price for all that. So when God said, trust me, why would he make him wait 25 years? Goes back to what Will's talking about. You need patience. What will God do? How many of the time tests does God give us? Whoever says, who is born and endowed with all the patience they'll ever need? Nobody ever gets that. And so how do you learn patience? I know that's the reason why I quote Romans 15, verse 4. That's one way. What is that? Things written before time, written for our learning, that we through the patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope. Well, what's the other way? That's never enough learning from the examples of people. So how else can we learn patience? Well, going through tough times, but do we have to go through them all? See, that's where the church comes in. Like with Bill. How long did you fight the battle of cancer, Bill, before finally Dr. Hannah said it's in remission? 3 years. What did we learn from that? What was it? Was it grade 4 when it started? It was bad. but he's still here. What's the lesson from that? Some of us have had family members that died, though. What's the lesson from that? What do you still do? Do what you can with the time that you have. See, there's another question. Why does God take some faithful members home? Why do they die early? That's a tough question. Leave a congregation behind. When I was down at South Haven, that was a great congregation. They had 16 deacons. If you were to ask people who were the favorite 5 deacons, pretty much everybody would come up with the favorite 5 deacons. Over a period of 5 years, 3 of them died. One of them died from a brain tumor. The other died from Lou Gehrig's disease. And the other burned up in a truck fire. You think that was tough? Why those men? The first one that died of the brain tumor, he was one of the finest deacons I ever saw in my life. He was a retired fireman in the city of Memphis. His life was spent serving. Every Monday was dedicated to doing nothing, but he could fix anything. Every day, every Monday of the week was the day he spent going to fix the houses of widows who didn't have family. When there was a funeral that took place, it didn't matter if you were a member of South Haven and your grandpa died and he lived in Oklahoma, you know what he was going to do? Drive to Oklahoma to support the family. Sound like a good guy? Why did God take him? See, there are questions along the way, but in the middle of it, what do we have to do? We got to go with what we know, and that shows the question. Like the book of Job, what do we learn from the book of Job about questions? That every single question we have will be answered. So what do? What's the attitude? Trust and obey. What did Job learn as we look the last 2 or 3 minutes? What did Job learn from his experience? Look at Job 42. Talk about some lessons of faith. What did Job learn from that experience? Job 42. And what did he make those friends do, by the way, if you read the rest of the chapter? Well, how did the friends get their forgiveness? Who did they have to go through? If you recall, go read it. Who did they have to go through to get their forgiveness? Had to go through Job. There you go. Job 42. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do everything, that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You ask, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. Listen, please, and let me speak. You said, I'll question you, and you shall answer me. I've heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye does what? Sees you. What does he mean by that? My eye sees you. What did he see? Literally, did he see God? What do you mean by that? Well, my eye sees you. He had a different level of faith than he had before. Not every question will be answered to the satisfaction that we want. And so the mindset is there's an intellectual agreement. That's the first part, where you believe certain things. But the trusting part, if God said it, I believe it, that settles it, and go on with doing things. And then with that trust in God, we do the things that need to be done, whether we understand it or not, and God will bless us again and again and again. So the thing that tonight to learn, when we talk about faith, there's the intellectual part that has to be agreed with, accepted, but the hard part that most people neglect is what part? It's the complete trust part, the trust part. So if you look at the handout, to sum it all up, number 6, the bottom of the second page, true faith involves the mind. What does it do? Believe. It involves the heart. It does what? And then it involves the will. It has to obey. Can sometimes you know what right is, and not do it? It happens all the time. I know I need to do this, and God will bless me for it, but sometimes people falter. Yeah, well, we all have our weak moments. I mean, look at David. I mean, when he got off track, he got off track. But couple that with Luke chapter 15, what do we see about the other aspect of God? When the prodigal son came home, what was the one word that would represent what happened to him? He was willing to go back as a slave. He went back, he was restored as a what? As a son. And so we can blow it, and there may be a price to pay, as David, but God is ultimately concerned about our soul. Lives get broken all the time. God's in the business of fixing broken lives, but that's where the scriptures are there, but they have to be applied. You have to take the time to see how these things are applied. That's where the meditation comes in, where the thinking, what's your focus? You can focus on what you don't have and get bitter, or you can focus on what's God provided you and get better. Our time is up. Appreciate your good attendance and your questions. Thank you.